The dense forest lay still under the heavy blanket of snow, a serene wilderness untouched by human hands for miles. Above, the gray sky pressed down like an oppressive weight, and the winds whispered secrets through the towering pines. The world felt suspended in that brief moment between breaths, the deep, unspoken stillness before the chaos of the storm. This was Zara's world. Zara, a powerful German shepherd, was in the midst of her most grueling training yet. She was training to be an avalanche rescue dog, her duty to protect, to find those buried beneath the snow, her acute sense of smell and sharp instincts trusted with lives. Her trainer, a seasoned handler named Eli, had been her constant companion from the day she was chosen. Together, they ventured deeper into the snow-covered expanse of the forest, far from the familiar paths they knew. This was a real test, and it would take every ounce of Zara's training and every beat of Eli's heart. The area was remote, a wildlife sanctuary so isolated that the only signs of human life were the occasional tracks they left behind. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their dark silhouettes cut against the pale sky, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and ice. The snow beneath their feet was heavy, packed down by the weight of an impending storm. The mountains looming in the distance were unforgiving, their jagged peaks veiled by swirling gusts of wind. Zara was focused, her eyes trained ahead as she trotted confidently alongside Eli. The cold air bit at their skin, but neither of them flinched. Eli was the guide here, both for Zara and himself. His sharp eyes swept over the terrain, measuring the ever-changing landscape, scanning for any potential dangers. Suddenly, Zara's ears perked up. She slowed her pace, nose sniffing the cold, bitter air. Eli halted too, sensing the shift in her demeanor. She was alert, attuned to something in the silence of the forest that he couldn't yet understand. Minutes passed in heavy silence, only the wind and the occasional crunch of snow beneath their feet filling the void. Zara's body was rigid, her muscles taut, her gaze fixed on a distant thicket of trees. There was something about the air that felt different now, a slight, almost imperceptible change. Eli exhaled a breath, visible in the cold, before nodding to Zara. "Search," he whispered, his voice barely more than a murmur. Zara dashed ahead, her paws cutting through the snow with practiced precision. Eli followed, his footsteps muffled in the deepening snow as they veered toward the location where Zara had paused earlier. The landscape seemed to close in around them, a silent observer to their every movement. Zara's nose led her to the base of an ancient pine tree, its gnarled roots twisted like forgotten hands reaching beneath the earth. She sniffed frantically, her tail stiff with focus. Eli stopped just behind her, his breath quickening. They'd been out here for hours, and Zara hadn't made a false mow yet. Whatever she had sensed, it was important. The wind picked up again, howling through the branches above, sending a flurry of snow into the air. Eli's hand gripped his beacon, the signal to call for help should the situation go beyond training. But something kept him rooted to the spot, watching Zara as she worked. Minutes turned into what felt like an eternity. Zara's movements became frantic, her paws scraping at the snow beneath the tree. Eli's chest tightened with anxiety. Was this part of the training, or had something unexpected occurred? Suddenly, Zara let out a sharp bark, her body tensing like a coiled spring. Eli's heart skipped a beat as she dug into the snow, her paws striking hard against something solid. The intensity in her movements was unmistakable. She had found something. Eli knelt beside her, his eyes scanning the snow-covered ground. His fingers trembled as he helped Zara clear the snow. Beneath the surface, a person, was buried deep in the snow. The familiar shape of a jacket, a glove. A human, unmistakable even beneath layers of frozen white. His pulse quickened as he realized the gravity of the situation. This was no longer a drill. He yanked at the snow, clearing it frantically, each pull of the cold earth beneath his hands sending panic surging through his veins. Zara's growls had subsided, replaced by steady determination as she nudged Eli, urging him to work faster. The snow seemed to shift around them, as if the earth itself had become restless. The storm was picking up, the wind howling like a living thing. The buried body felt too still, too cold under the earth. Was it too late? Eli's mind raced as he tried to recall the training. He had to stay calm. He had to dig deep. His hands ached with the effort, and the wind, now merciless, stung his face. But there was no time to hesitate. He felt it, a weak pulse beneath the cold layers of snow, a flicker of life. The body wasn't lifeless. The wind screamed, louder now, carrying with it a new scent, something foreign. Zara's hackles stood on end, and she snapped her gaze back to the trees, her body stiff with unease. The same unease Eli had felt earlier, but had dismissed. Something was watching them. He dared not look away from his task, even as Zara's growls became more insistent. He could feel her eyes fixed on something, her focus unwavering. A distant rustling reached his ears. Something moving in the shadows of the trees, something large. The body in the snow was nearly uncovered, and just as Eli reached for the person's wrist, a low, chilling howl echoed through the forest. Zara's eyes widened, and she barked, her body trembling with urgency. Eli turned just in time to see the outline of a massive creature darting between the trees, a figure larger than anything he had expected. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't an animal he recognized. A sudden, unsettling twist of the wind carried an unfamiliar stench, the musk of something predatory, something ancient. Zara's frantic barks grew louder, desperate now, warning Eli with all her might. She knew, and he knew too. Their training had prepared them for avalanches, for the elements, but this was something they couldn't anticipate. A shadow moved again, faster now, slipping through the trees. And then, as if drawn by some dark force, the forest fell quiet again. Eli's hands shook as he touched the wrist of the buried person. Alive, but barely. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment he couldn't decide whether to continue digging or turn his attention to the thing lurking in the trees. But Zara's growls had turned into a frantic whine, her eyes wild with fear. The presence in the woods was drawing closer. And Zara was terrified. Eli's decision was made for him. He had to get the person out. But as he pulled the snow away one final time, his hands froze in place. What had once been a person now lay still, a lifeless body, its eyes wide open, frozen in place. Zara whined again, pulling away from the scene. Her gaze never wavered from the darkness beyond, and as Eli stood there, looking down at the body that no longer resembled a human, the truth sank in. They weren't alone, not in this forest, and whatever had buried the body, whatever was lurking in the snow, it wasn't human. A low growl rumbled from the shadows. Eli didn't have to turn around to know that the hunt had just begun. Eli's breath caught in his throat as the growl echoed through the trees, low and primal. Zara's ears were flat against her head now, her body rigid with terror. The air around them had shifted, carrying a sense of impending doom. It was as if the very forest had turned against them, an unspoken warning written in the frigid air. His mind raced, trying to process the situation. The body, the person, was no longer alive, yet they had just felt its pulse. It had been alive when Zara found it, but now it wasn't. It was a cruel trick, the kind the wilderness could play on you when it decided to test your resolve. Zara's eyes never left the shadowed forest, her nose twitching as she sniffed the air. Her growls had quieted, replaced with a low whine, almost as if she were begging him to understand. There was something out there, something dangerous, something they could not see. Eli felt it too, a prickling sensation crawling down his spine, his instincts screaming at him to move. He glanced at the body one last time, the lifeless form still hauntingly visible in the snow. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, he considered abandoning the person, leaving the dead to the wilderness. But he knew better. His duty was clear. He couldn't leave someone behind, no matter how twisted the situation had become. With trembling hands, he reached into his pack, fumbling for the beacon that would call for help. But before his fingers could grasp the device, a shadow moved in the corner of his vision. It was fast, too fast to be natural. Eli froze, his heart racing as the thing darted between the trees, barely visible but impossible to ignore. Zara was already in motion, her legs carrying her toward the shadow, barking with a mixture of fear and fury. Eli's instincts kicked in, and he lunged forward to grab her collar, pulling her back just as something massive and dark emerged from the trees. It was the shape of a creature, but not one Eli had ever seen before. It was too large, its form too fluid to be a bear or wolf, yet its movements were too predatory. Its fur was matted, its eyes glowing a faint, eerie green in the fading light. Its presence radiated malevolence, as if it had been waiting for them, watching them for far longer than they had realized. Zara's growls intensified, but she kept her distance, her body tense and ready to spring. Eli's hand tightened around her collar, his heart thudding in his chest. He couldn't think, he couldn't move. The creature's eyes locked onto him, and for a fleeting moment he saw a flash of recognition, its gaze as intelligent as it was chilling. It wasn't an animal driven by instinct, it was something more. Something intelligent. Eli took a step back, his pulse hammering in his throat, his mind scrambling for a plan. They were trapped, deep in the forest, isolated with no way to escape and no time to prepare. His eyes darted around, searching for any form of cover, any way to outsmart the creature. But the creature didn't move. It stood there, as if sizing them up, waiting for them to make the first move. The wind howled through the trees, swirling the snow around them, and for a moment the only sounds were the growls from Zara and the quiet rustling of branches above. Eli swallowed hard. There was no way to outrun this thing. There was no place to hide. The wilderness had turned against them, and they were alone, at the mercy of whatever stalked the forest. A sudden thought pierced through the fog of panic. Zara, the dog, the one constant in this nightmare. Zara had always been more than just a partner in training. She had been his ally in the field, his lifeline in situations that would break most men. He couldn't let her down. He couldn't fail her now. His grip on her collar loosened, and he gave her a brief, silent command. Zara's ears perked up, her body still, her gaze locked on the creature in front of them. For a brief moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Zara was going to do what she was trained to do, and Eli had to follow her lead. Without warning, Zara darted forward, moving with the speed of a blur, her body twisting in a fluid motion as she charged the creature. Eli's breath caught in his chest, the world feeling like it had slowed to a crawl. He watched as Zara leaped into the air, her powerful jaws snapping inches from the creature's throat. But the creature was faster. With an unnatural swiftness, it twisted sideways, its claws raking through the air, missing Zara by a hair's breadth. Zara landed on her feet, spinning back around in a split second, ready for the next strike. Eli didn't hesitate. His hands were shaking, but he grabbed his pack, pulling out the flare gun he kept for emergency. He fired it into the air, the bright red streak cutting through the darkened sky, momentarily blinding them both. The creature recoiled, its glowing eyes narrowing in what could only be described as frustration. Zara, seizing the opportunity, lunged again, this time aiming for the creature's underbelly. The creature roared, a sound that shook the very trees around them. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and for a moment it seemed as though the entire forest would collapse in on them. The beast lunged at Zara, but she was too quick, ducking low and springing to the side. Zara had her moment. She was faster, sharper, and with a final explosive move she lunged at the creature's side, sinking her teeth into its flesh. The creature howled in pain, a deafening sound that echoed through the forest, but it was too late. Zara's grip was unshakable, and Eli, seizing the moment, grabbed hold of his beacon. He hit the button. The signal would go out, help would be on the way. But would they be fast enough? The creature, wounded and angry, staggered back, its glowing eyes flicking between Zara and Eli. Then, with one last growl, it turned and disappeared into the trees, vanishing into the wilderness as quickly as it had appeared. For a long moment there was silence, only the sound of Zara's heavy breathing and Eli's pounding heart filling the void. The snow continued to fall, and the wind shifted again, this time carrying a sense of calm. Zara stood, her body still tense, but the danger had passed for now. Eli dropped to his knees beside the body, heart still racing, and reached out to check for a pulse again. To his relief, he felt it weak, but there, the person was still alive, and help was on the way. He looked at Zara, her dark eyes meeting his, both of them sharing an understanding that went beyond words. They had survived this, together. But deep in the forest, something still watched them, and whatever it was, it had not finished its hunt. Ellie's heart beat in his ears as he stared into the dark forest. The snow had begun to fall heavier now, and the landscape around them looked even more alien, muted, devoid of the warmth of daylight. Zara, still on high alert, stood with her tail slightly lowered, her gaze fixed on the dense trees where the creature had disappeared. Every so often her ears would twitch, a small sign that the wilderness was far from still. It was as if something lurked just beyond their sight, waiting for its moment to return. He slowly rose to his feet, his body stiff from the cold, and took a careful step toward the body. The pulse was still faint but steady. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, but there was no time to relax, no time to feel relief. The flare was already burning itself out, the light from the signal dimming with every passing second. Help was still minutes away, maybe longer. That gave him no peace. The creature would be back. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the way the air had shifted after it left. He glanced at Zara again. She was still tense, every muscle coiled as if she were waiting for another attack, another sign of the beast. Despite her calm demeanor, Ellie knew she could feel it too. Something in the forest had changed. They were no longer just on a routine search and rescue mission. They were now part of something darker, a game they hadn't fully understood until now. He moved closer to the body, taking slow, careful steps, trying to ignore the terrifying possibility that whatever had attacked them could still be close by. His hands were trembling as he checked the body again, repositioning it to make sure it wasn't in danger of freezing. He pressed his fingers to the person's neck, hoping for a stronger pulse, but it remained faint. His breath quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. Zara was watching him, eyes unwavering. Then it came again, a sound. It was soft at first, almost too faint to hear over the whisper of the wind, but it quickly grew louder, a crackling, like the sound of branches breaking under heavy weight. Eli's heart clenched. His gaze shot to the trees where the creature had vanished earlier. There was movement, a blur of shadow, swift and unsettling, darting between the trunks. Zara's muscles tensed again, and without warning she began to move, her body low to the ground as she crept toward the source of the disturbance. Eli gripped her collar, his voice hushed but firm as he whispered a command to stay. She stopped for only a moment, her sharp eyes still tracking whatever was moving through the trees. Then, without a second thought, she pulled free of his grasp and surged forward, faster than he could react. The sound came again, closer this time, louder, unmistakably threatening. Eli's breath came in shallow gasps as he followed in Zara's wake, his every step heavy in the snow. The forest felt alive now, vibrating with energy. The faint growls from earlier seemed to echo back at him from all sides, a constant reminder that something unseen was moving in the dark, drawing closer. The shadow moved again, faster now, flitting between the trees just out of Eli's reach. There was a flicker of something large and dark, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark like embers. Zara was ahead now, too far for Eli to catch up. She was fearless, her instincts leading her forward into the unknown. She wasn't just following her training now. She was chasing something, a threat she knew all too well, and Eli had to trust her. The growl reached his ears again, louder this time, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated in his chest. The creature was near. His pulse quickened as his mind raced. Zara was too far ahead, and he couldn't afford to let her face this thing alone. He ushed forward, his legs burning from the exertion, the cold air stinging his lungs. Zara's silhouette was now lost in the darkness, but he could hear her, her low growls, and the sudden sharp bark that cut through the silence. She was on it. Then, in the distance, he saw it, a flash of fur, the massive creature lunging towards Zara, its eyes wild with a hunger that made his blood run cold.